You're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, heart racing, mind spiraling through every worst-case scenario your brain can manufacture. Your chest feels tight. Your thoughts won't stop. You've tried the apps, the breathing exercises, the supplements, the therapy sessions, and still, anxiety grips you like a vice. But what if I told you that a group of people living 2,000 years ago, with no smartphones, no therapy apps, no pharmaceutical companies, had already figured out the cure? Not a treatment, not a coping mechanism, an actual cure. And the wildest part? We've known about it this entire time. We just forgot how to use it. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you is going to fundamentally change how you understand your own mind. And by the end of this video, you're going to have access to the same ancient technology that allowed monks to achieve a level of mental peace that most of us can't even imagine. Let's dive in. So let me start by saying something that might sound controversial, but stick with me because there's a point to this. Modern anxiety treatment is broken, not completely useless, but fundamentally incomplete. We've turned anxiety into this disease that needs to be managed, medicated, and talked about endlessly in therapy sessions. And look, I'm not saying therapy doesn't help or that medication doesn't have its place, but here's what's fascinating. We're treating anxiety like it's this external invader that attacks us when the ancient monks understood something profound that we've completely forgotten. They understood that anxiety isn't something that happens to you. It's something you're actively doing to yourself moment by moment. And once you understand the mechanics of how you're creating it, you can stop. Now, before you click away thinking this is going to be some oversimplified meditation pitch, hear me out, because what these monks discovered goes so much deeper than anything you've been taught about mindfulness or breathing exercises. They discovered the actual source code of human suffering, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture this. It's around the year 500 BCE, and in various parts of Asia, groups of people are leaving their comfortable lives, walking away from families, possessions, everything, to go sit in caves and forests for years, sometimes decades. Why? Because they were obsessed with answering one question that consumed them completely. Why do we suffer? And can we stop it? Not manage it, not cope with it, but completely end it. And here's where it gets interesting. These weren't religious fanatics or people running away from problems. Many of them were highly educated, came from wealthy families, had everything society told them they should want. But they noticed something that drove them crazy. They noticed that no matter what they achieved, no matter what they acquired, no matter what pleasures they experienced, there was this underlying current of unease, of dissatisfaction, of anxiety about losing what they had or not getting what they wanted. Sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what you're experiencing right now in the 21st century. Same problem, different century. So these early monks, they started doing something radical. They started investigating their own minds with the same precision that scientists would later use to investigate the physical world. They would sit for hours, days, weeks, just watching their thoughts, watching their emotions, watching their physical sensations, trying to understand the mechanics of suffering. And what they discovered was absolutely revolutionary. They discovered that anxiety, and really all psychological suffering, operates on a principle that's so simple it sounds almost stupid when you first hear it, but once you truly understand it, it changes everything. Here's the principle. Anxiety is what happens when your mind is anywhere except where your body is. Let me say that again because it's crucial. Anxiety is what happens when your mind is anywhere except where your body is. Right now, as you're watching this video, your body is sitting or standing or lying down somewhere safe. You're not being chased by a predator. There's no immediate physical danger. But your mind is somewhere completely different. It's in tomorrow's meeting that you're worried about. It's in last week's conversation that you're replaying and analyzing. It's in next year's potential disaster that you're trying to prevent. It's in the fantasy future where everything goes wrong. Your mind is time-traveling constantly, and every time it jumps out of the present moment, it creates a little bit of anxiety. And here's the kicker that the monks discovered. The future doesn't exist, the past doesn't exist. Not in any real, tangible way. The only thing that actually exists is this moment right now. But we spend almost all of our mental energy living in times that literally don't exist. And then we wonder why we feel anxious. The monks realized that when you're fully present in the current moment, not thinking about it, not analyzing it but actually experiencing it directly, anxiety becomes impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Because anxiety requires a story about the future or the past to exist. It needs narrative fuel. Without that fuel, it simply cannot sustain itself. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, that sounds nice in theory, but my anxiety is about real things. I have actual problems. I have bills to pay, responsibilities to handle, real threats in my life. And you're absolutely right. The monks weren't saying your problems aren't real. They were saying something much more subtle and much more powerful. They were saying that the problem itself and your anxiety about the problem are two completely separate things, and the anxiety doesn't help you solve the problem. In fact, it makes you worse at solving it. Think about the last time you were really anxious about something. Were you thinking clearly? Were you creative? Were you able to see solutions easily? Probably not, because anxiety puts your brain into threat mode, into survival mode, where your thinking becomes narrow and rigid and you lose access to your higher cognitive functions. The monks discovered that when you drop out of anxiety and into presence, you don't become passive or uncaring. You actually become more effective, more creative, more capable of handling whatever challenges come your way. So how did they do it? How did these monks actually cure their anxiety? This is where it gets practical, and this is the part that we've forgotten in modern times. They developed a practice that's been translated into English as meditation, but that word has become so watered down and commercialized that it barely means anything anymore. What they were actually doing was training their attention. That's it. That's the whole secret. They were training their ability to keep their attention in the present moment instead of letting it constantly drift into past and future, and they discovered something that modern neuroscience has now confirmed. Attention is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it gets. Most people living today have the attention span of a goldfish on caffeine. We've trained ourselves through social media, through constant stimulation, through endless entertainment, to have attention that's scattered and weak and constantly jumping from thing to thing. And then we wonder why we're anxious. It's like never exercising and then wondering why you can't run a marathon. But here's the good news. Just like you can train your body to be stronger, you can train your attention to be stronger. And when your attention gets strong enough, when you can keep it anchored in the present moment consistently, anxiety starts to dissolve. Not because you're suppressing it or fighting it or managing it, but because you're removing the fuel that creates it in the first place. The monks would start by doing something incredibly simple. They would sit down and put all of their attention on their breath, not controlling it, not trying to breathe in any special way, just watching it, breathing in, knowing they're breathing in, breathing out, knowing they're breathing out. And here's what would happen. Within about 3 seconds, their mind would drift. They'd start thinking about dinner, or about something someone said, or about their plans for tomorrow. And the moment they noticed their mind had drifted, they would gently, without judgment, without criticism, bring their attention back to the breath. And then 3 seconds later, drift again, and bring it back again, and drift again, and bring it back again. And they would do this for hours, for years, for decades. And slowly, gradually, their ability to keep their attention where they wanted it to keep it got stronger and stronger. They were literally rewiring their brains, building new neural pathways that gave them control over their own attention, instead of having their attention be controlled by every random thought and worry that popped up. Now here's what's crucial to understand. This isn't about stopping thoughts. The monks weren't trying to create some blank, empty mind state. Thoughts are going to happen. That's what minds do. They produce thoughts. Trying to stop thoughts is like trying to stop your heart from beating. What they were training was the ability to not get swept away by every thought that appears. To see a thought arise, acknowledge it, and then choose whether to follow it or not. Most people have no choice. A worried thought appears, and they're immediately off to the races, spinning anxiety stories for the next 20 minutes. The monks trained themselves to see the thought, recognize it as just a thought, not reality, just a mental event, and let it pass by like a cloud passing through the sky. And when you can do that, when you can watch anxious thoughts appear without getting hooked by them, without believing them, without following them down the rabbit hole, they lose their power over you. They become just weather patterns in your mind, passing through, no big deal. But here's where most people make a huge mistake when they learn about this stuff. They try it once or twice, sitting there focusing on their breath, and after 2 minutes their mind is going crazy, and they think, "This doesn't work, this isn't for me, I'm too anxious for meditation." But that's like going to the gym once, trying to lift a heavy weight, failing, and then saying exercise doesn't work for me. Of course you can't lift the heavy weight yet. Your muscles aren't developed. Of course you can't control your attention yet, you haven't trained it. The monks understood that this was a gradual training process. They didn't expect instant results. They knew they were rewiring their entire relationship with their own mind, and that takes time. But here's what's beautiful. Even though it takes time to fully develop, you start seeing results almost immediately. After even just a few days of practicing attention training for 10 or 15 minutes a day, you'll notice moments where you catch yourself starting to spiral into anxiety, and you'll be able to stop it. You'll notice spaces between thoughts that you never saw before. You'll notice that you have more choice in what you focus on. And over weeks and months, those moments become more frequent until eventually your default state shifts. Instead of your default state being low-level anxiety with occasional moments of peace, your default state becomes peace with occasional moments of anxiety. And when anxiety does arise, you know exactly how to work with it. You see it, you recognize it, you don't fight it or resist it. You just don't feed it with attention, and it dissolves. Now let's talk about why this works from a modern scientific perspective. Because the monks didn't have brain scanners and neuroscience labs, but they intuitively understood something that we're only now confirming with technology. Your brain has two fundamentally different modes of operation. There's what scientists call the default mode network, which is the part of your brain that's active when you're lost in thought, mind-wandering, thinking about yourself, ruminating on the past, worrying about the future. This is the anxiety production network. And then there's what they call the task-positive network, which is the part of your brain that's active when you're focused on the present moment, engaged with what's actually happening right now. When one of these networks is active, the other one is suppressed. They work in opposition to each other. So when you're fully engaged in the present moment, paying attention to your breath, or to the sensations in your body, or to what you're actually doing right now, the default mode network, the anxiety network, literally can't be fully active at the same time. The monks discovered this 2,000 years ago, without any technology. They discovered it through direct experience by simply watching their own minds with incredible precision. They noticed that when they were fully present, anxious thoughts couldn't gain traction, and when they were lost in thought, projecting into past or future, anxiety would arise. So they trained themselves to spend more time present and less time lost in thought. And modern neuroscience has now shown us exactly what's happening in the brain when people do this. Studies on long-term meditators, on monks who have done this practice for years, show dramatic differences in their brain structure and function. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for attention and emotional regulation, is significantly more developed. Their amygdala, the fear and anxiety center of the brain, is less reactive. The connections between their prefrontal cortex and their amygdala, which represents their ability to regulate their emotional responses, are stronger. They've literally physically changed their brains through this practice, and you can too. But here's something else the monks understood that we've completely forgotten. They understood that you can't think your way out of anxiety. You can't solve anxiety with more thinking. This is the trap that modern therapy sometimes falls into. We try to combat anxious thoughts with different thoughts, more positive thoughts, more rational thoughts. But that's still living in the world of thought. That's still living in the realm where anxiety operates. What the monks discovered is that you have to drop down below thought altogether, into direct sensory experience, into the feeling of your breath moving in and out, into the sensation of your feet on the ground, into the sounds around you, into the visual field in front of you. When you're experiencing life directly through your senses, instead of through the filter of your thoughts, anxiety cannot exist. It's like trying to play a video game without turning on the screen. The game requires the screen to exist. Anxiety requires thought to exist. Without thought, it simply has no platform to operate on. So the practical cure that the monks discovered goes like this. First, you train your attention to be strong enough to stay present. You do this through daily practice. Even just 10 to 15 minutes a day of sitting and watching your breath, noticing when your mind drifts, bringing it back. No judgment, No frustration, just training, like going to the gym for your attention. Second, you start bringing that trained attention into your daily life. When you're washing dishes, you actually wash dishes. You feel the warm water, you see the soap bubbles, you notice the sensations in your hands. You don't wash dishes while your mind is somewhere else planning tomorrow or replaying yesterday. When you're walking, you actually walk. You feel your feet touching the ground with each step. You notice the movement of your body through space. You don't walk while lost in thought. When you're talking to someone, you actually listen, you give them your full attention. You don't listen while simultaneously thinking about what you're going to say next or how they're judging you or what you need to do later. And third, when anxiety arises, because it will, you treat it completely differently than you've been taught. You don't try to think it away, you don't try to rationalize it or fight it or suppress it. You get curious about it. You turn toward it instead of away from it. You feel where it is in your body. You notice the physical sensations. Is it tightness in your chest, tension in your shoulders, a knot in your stomach? And you just feel those sensations directly, without the story, without thinking about why you're anxious or what you're anxious about. Just raw physical sensation. And here's what the monks discovered that seems like magic until you experience it yourself. When you feel anxiety as pure physical sensation, without attaching the story to it, it changes, it moves, it dissolves, it transforms. Because what we call anxiety is actually two things bundled together: physical sensations in the body and a mental story about those sensations. The physical sensations alone aren't the problem. They're just sensations, energy moving through your body. The suffering comes from the story we tell about those sensations, from the narrative of threat and danger and catastrophe that we layer on top of them. When you separate the sensations from the story, when you feel the sensations directly without believing the story, the anxiety loses its power. The monks proved this to themselves through direct experience over and over for 2,000 years. And now we're finally starting to understand why it works through modern neuroscience. But we've forgotten the actual practice. We've turned it into apps and guided meditations and corporate mindfulness programs that are so watered down they barely work. The real practice is rawer and simpler and more demanding. It requires you to actually sit down every day and train your attention like you are training for the Olympics. It requires you to bring that attention into every moment of your life, not just when you're sitting on a cushion. It requires you to get intimate with your own suffering instead of constantly trying to escape it or fix it or understand it. And it requires patience, because you're undoing decades of conditioning, decades of training your mind to be anxious, decades of training your attention to be scattered. But here's what I can promise you, because this is what the monks discovered and what countless people since then have verified through their own experience. If you actually do this practice, not half-heartedly, not occasionally when you feel like it, but with genuine commitment and consistency, your anxiety will transform. Not because you've managed it or coped with it, but because you've removed the fundamental conditions that create it. You'll have moments and then hours and then days where you realize you haven't been anxious at all. Not because nothing stressful happened, but because your mind isn't constantly projecting into futures that don't exist or ruminating on pasts that are already gone. You'll start to experience a kind of peace that does not depend on your external circumstances being perfect. A peace that comes from being fully here, fully present, fully alive, in the only moment that actually exists, which is now. The monks called this enlightenment or awakening or liberation, and those words sound grand and mystical and unattainable. But what they were really describing was something much simpler. They were describing what it's like to live without constantly being at war with the present moment, to live without your mind constantly being somewhere else, generating anxiety about times that don't exist, to live with your attention under your control instead of being jerked around by every thought and worry that pops up. That's the cure they discovered 2,000 years ago. Not a pill, not a therapy technique, not a breathing exercise, though breathing exercises can be part of it. The cure is learning to be where you are, training yourself to inhabit the present moment fully, developing the attention strength to keep your mind here instead of letting it constantly escape into past and future. It's simple, but it's not easy. It requires practice. It requires commitment. It requires you to go against everything our modern culture is training you to do, which is to constantly distract yourself, constantly stimulate yourself, constantly escape the present moment through entertainment and social media and endless busyness. But if you're tired of being anxious, if you're tired of the constant low-level suffering that comes from a mind that won't stop spinning, if you're ready to actually address the root cause, instead of just managing symptoms, then this is your path. This is what the monks discovered. This is what they've been trying to tell us for 2,000 years. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to become a monk to benefit from it. You don't have to shave your head and move to a monastery and give up your possessions. You just have to start training your attention. 15 minutes a day. Sitting quietly, watching your breath, noticing when your mind drifts, bringing it back. No judgment, no frustration, just training. And bringing that trained attention into your daily life, into your conversations, into your activities, into your experience of this moment right now. That's it. That's the cure. It's been here all along, we just forgot it. So the question is, are you ready to remember?